This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, so last week we finished with the discussion of Oino on Mammon, and very detailed, a lot of nuances. Now, today, we're going to start a new Mishnah, which also talks about Ono, but interestingly talks about a subject that many of us were aware of, and yet maybe we don't internalize. If we think about Ono on Mammon, okay, we're dealing with money, we have to be careful. But there's something called Oino's Dvarim. There is Oino, believe it or not, on words. So how does that play out? What does that mean that there's Oino on words? So let's look at the Mishnah, and the Mishnah will sort of lay this out and begins a very interesting discussion, which almost becomes a Agada type, where it's halacha, of course, but also Agada. So this will be a very interesting subject we're going to go down. So the Mishnah on Nun Ches Amud Beis, Kishem Shana b'mekach memker, just like there is Oino in buying, selling, monetary matters. Kach Oino b'dvarim is also Oino in words. Words matter. We only knows that words matter, and there is such a thing as Oino. Okay, now the Gemara. Now the Mishnah will start this discussion, which the Gemara will go in depth. In other words, what is Oino b'dvarim? Lo yomar lo bekama chayfetz zeh. How much you have a person who comes into a store and he's examining the merchandise, and he says, "How much is this object?" Right? Simple question. Nothing wrong with it. Who eino lo likach, but he knows in advance that he's not going to buy. He's only going to have a discussion and then walk away. That the Mishnah tells us is Oino's Devarim. If you don't have a havamina to buy, so the question now becomes, what does that do to our window shopping? Because people look, they evaluate, they see, they ask. But if you have no intention, that's a very important point, which the Gemara is going to point out, whether or not you even had a havamina. But if you have no havamina, then it's Oino's Devarim. Now, even further, and this is something we can actually relate to, if someone was a Baal Tshuva, a real Baal Tshuva, then it's forbidden. You can't say to him, remember what you did before you became a Baal Tshuva. Remember all the averis you did, like all the whatever you ate wasn't kosher, etc. You can't do that. That's Oino's Devarim. That's oppression by words. In who ben gaving. This is the famous Gemara. If someone is a ger, right, and we know that gerim have a special place in the Rabbi Shalom's arsenal of mitzvahs, then you can't come back to him and say, "Oh, your forefathers were this or that." You have to be careful not to touch on something that will make a person feel bad or uncomfortable, and the Gemara will elaborate. It's even more than discomfort that we're really worried about. We'll talk about that. And here it quotes a pasuk, especially about a ger, because they say the ger has a special place here that you can't oppress the ger, and by saying these words to the ger, you essentially are going to oppress him, make him feel bad even more so, and therefore it's improper to do. Okay, so now that's
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I don't know if the Gemara is going to get into this, but if somebody does that to a ger to motivate them, in other words, to say, if they feel they're slipping, and to say, you were here and now you're there, and this is, you don't want to lose, the status, is that undermining them, or can that be motivational and acceptable?
Okay, so you're saying that you're saying something to him as a motivation to keep his religiosity or keep his his fervor going forward. So it's a subtle difference, but if you're encouraging someone to remain religious or commit to the faith, then again, we'll see how that plays out in words, but you can say something more subtly than saying, "Oh, you ate chazer," or your father was an anti-Semite, or something like that. In other words, the stark reality of putting his past into a negative aspect is forbidden. What you're suggesting, Michael, is how do you say words of encouragement that can encourage someone without stepping over the line to, let's use the word insult, okay, for the time being, insulting him that his background is coming back to haunt him. I think that there is a subtle difference. I agree. The question is dvarim. It's always boiled down to words, which is why I have to say that people involved in kiruv have been carefully trained when they deal with people who are outside the faith, who may have never been in, or maybe were in and went out, is they're carefully trained how to present and talk about this to them that will encourage them, to your point, Michael, without having to go back and say whatever is a negative. So I think the answer is yes, you can, but you have to be very, very careful not to have it cross into onus devarim, because even when you're trying to help someone and you violate these halachas, onus devarim, the end doesn't justify the means. In other words, we're not going to say just because you're going to possibly help him on the derech that you can go back and say things that here we're saying are forbidden. So it's a fine line. It's a fine line. I'm not going to tell you specifically what words, but I think if you're involved in this, then that's really an important place to start, is to understand how kiruv works and what doesn't work. Maybe plainly saying your father was a goy and look what you're doing doesn't work. That's not exactly a way to fondly move someone in that direction. It's a tough one, Michael. It's a tough call, but I think you understand what we're saying here is that you have to know how to do this without putting a heavy foot on the accelerator. All right. So that's the Mishnah. That's how the Mishnah explains to us. Now we're going to get into the weeds a little bit and get a little bit more understanding, and I think it'll be eye-opening for all of us because we're all sensitive, but sometimes we miss the mark. We really miss the mark in terms of unintentionally doing things that may be forbidden of Allah. The rabbis learned as follows, and this is a pasuk in Vayikra, which I'm going to take a quick look at here with us, so that we see the pasuk. Okay, the pasuk is in Bahar, and the Torah says, with regard to this Indian, interesting word. The Torah tells us that that a person should not. Sonu is it's a little bit of a difficult word to translate. He shouldn't do wrong. Let's just say he shouldn't do wrong to his fellow man. Amiso, and you should have fear from God. So look what we're pairing together. A person should not make sin against too strong. He shouldn't hurt his fellow man. Be a race of and you should have fear from God. So we're going to see in a minute the juxtaposing of those two principles into one is something the Gemara has to grapple with. All right, so it says in the pasuk, "Lo sonu ish," a person should not do bad to his fellow man. Says the rabbi, this is a hint to onos devarim, that when it says lo sonu, it speaks about words, the kind of words that we've talked about, whether it's to a ger or to Baal Tshuva or in any of those events. Lo sonu. So now think about this. Going to asking someone what the cost of an item is without having any intention. You go into a shop, okay? Not just an idol on the street. You go into someone's store where he has an expectation that you may be a customer, and you ask him, how much is this ring? He's a jeweler. Ask him, how much is this ring? And he takes it out and shows it to you and spends a few minutes, and he tells you what it is, and you say, thank you very much, and walk out. So again, the fine point is here, he has no havamina. He has there was no question in his mind that he was not going to come in to buy an item in that person's store. That's considered oinos devarim. That's how far oinos devarim goes. So let's think about that for a minute. So now the Gemara, ata omer oinos devarim, you're going to say that lo sonu refers to nos devarim, o ena elabanos mammon. Maybe it's only dealing, maybe only deals with mammon, because that's something that clearly you've aggrieved someone by selling to him at an improper price, in a simple way, or buying something at a price that the seller isn't aware he's sort of giving away because it's worth much more. So how do we know that lo sonu deals with anos devarim? Maybe not. Says the Gemara, kishehu oimer, a little bit later, v'chisimkru min kol amisecha okono miyad amisecha. A few lines later, the Torah says that that if you when buying and selling, that you have to deal honestly. Hari onos moment. That's specifically talking about onos moment. It's saying tisimkuru. When you sell, that's a tip off that we're dealing by moment. So by nos moment, you have a straightforward pasuk. Homani mekayim lo sonu isha amiso. Why does the Torah repeat lo sonu isha amiso if you're going to have a havamina that deals with mammon, and we have a pasuk specifically that deals with mammon? So therefore, the Gemara says v'oinos devarim. So it has to be oinos devarim. In other words, each is on its own so important that each of them have a pasuk in the Torah. Lo simkuru kisimkuru min kol amisecha clearly deals with mammon, and the Torah is saying it's forbidden to have oinah. And when it says lo sonu, what did you do wrong? What did you do wrong? Teretz is oinos devarim. You said something that was improper, and for that there is the penalty of, when we say oinah, in other words, that's you shouldn't do that, and therefore there's two separate psukim to tell us both.
Rabbi,
yeah,
I want to ask a question about mamona. So I have an item to sell that is similar to something or the same as something that's being sold, and I want to sell it, and I go in and get the price, and then I give the guy and say, I'm selling mine for X. Is that permitted in that circumstance? Because his intent is not to buy, but his intent is to sell to a buyer who sells that item, and to quantify what that is. Does that go over the line in Ona?
I don't think it would. Again, you're going in to engage, so you're asking him the price, but you're not slighting him by saying, "Oh, thank you very much," and then there is this false expectation on the part of the seller that you may be a buyer. That's strictly what the Torah means. If you're going in to engage in a discussion, mekach umemker, and you're saying, this is a price. How about if I sell you something that you can then maybe turn around and sell to someone else, and I sell it to you at a lower price? Would that interest you? That already doesn't smack of oinos devarim. That's now people should be able to talk to each other and in buying and selling. If you come in, how else are you going to reach this person? Come into his store and you see what he's got and say, look, let me discuss something with you. so it's in the realm of maybe we can do business together, and therefore I'm asking you a question that can hardly be an os devar, because you're really following it up with an intent to try to do something with this fellow that could benefit him and you. Nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's when you give someone the false hope that you're there and he has a customer and he can treat you nicely, and then basically say thanks but no thanks, but you have no havamina. That's the key word, because we're going to see in the Gemara that intent is very, very important here, extremely important. So if your intent was, no, I want to know the price of that ring, I have no interest in buying it, that's strictly an ostavar. What you're asking, and once we get into it further, we're going to see that there are nuances that aren't an ostavar, even though you might think, oh, but he's not buying from the fellow. That's not an ostavar. So I think, to your point, that would probably not fall into the category of an ostavar once you engage him seriously. You engage him seriously in a discussion about buying and selling, then asking him the price would not be a problem. Okay, so that's pretty clear from the Torah that there are two separate tracks, one in Os Mammon, one in Os Devar. Frek the Gemara HaKetzah.
Right.
How do we understand? Yeah, Jay?
Suppose you're a competitor and you're going in to just look over his jewelry designs. You're going in there, I mean, it's just an expansion of what Michael just asked. You just want to observe because you want to take an image in your head. Obviously, if you take out your camera and take a picture, that's pretty bad. But you just want to see what it is, because you're going to go back home to your jeweler and say, I want you to design a ring exactly like this that I'll draw out. So he's stealing information, but he hasn't done anything. He hasn't talked to the guy. He's just walking in and browsing. Does this whole discussion cover browsing? That's basically your eyes and your mind. It's not words. It's not your mouth. You're not engaging the person. The person's on the other side of the store with a customer, and you're just going in to look at a special ring that you want to copy.
There, Jay, I think you're getting a lot closer to an Os Devarim. The Devarim, of course, means words, right? So what are we going to infer from that? We're going to infer that it's improper to lead a person on to think that you're legitimate and you're not legitimate. That's what we're really saying. Nos Devarim is the way to express it. In your case, that sounds like a Nos Devarim without it being Devarim, because you're doing the same thing, but you're not engaging him in conversation. But let's put it this way. For the storekeeper, and if you're in retail, you'll appreciate this, you're in a store and you need people to come into your store, go through the door. Once you do, there's a feeling of, wow, I may have a customer, etc. Someone walks through your door, walks around, as you say, doesn't take pictures, but has mental images of everything, then walks out. Is that not a false expectation? Which is really what Nos Devarim is, false expectation. So when you go ahead and do that, you're really, without the words, being over the law of Oino, because you let this fella down, because his whole expectation is that you're going to come in and talk. Now, it could be that you want to buy, and I'm telling you the price is $1,000, and you can only spend $500. So in other words, that's legitimate. That's the no.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button here, Rob. I had to unmute. I was trying to mute David.
You muted the rabbi.
Rabbi, I accidentally muted you when I was trying to mute David because you had a phone ringing in the background. So you have to unmute yourself. I'm sorry, my fault. Rabbi, can you hear me? Rabbi, I accidentally, there we go. There we go.
Okay.
Sorry about that, everybody.
Just get the mute button, right? So the point I'm trying to make is that it's not Oino if he tells you it's $1,000 for the ring and you say, I can only afford 500, and we have a discussion. That's not Oino. That's mekech umenker. That's the art of discussing and trying to make a deal. What's oinah is you have no intention of doing anything with this fellow, so you're misleading him into thinking you're a customer, and you say something, or in the case of Jay, you don't say anything. So it's the expectation, the legitimate expectation, where you have no intention of havamina, of even engaging in trying to buy the item. So I think it casts a net even beyond the devarim to the acts that you're talking about, Jay, where someone just comes in, walks around, and then walks out. That too is, I think, that flirts with Onos devarim in the sense that it's false expectations. So now the Gemara is going to give us some examples, and again, they mirror what the Mishnah says. So we'll go through this. If someone was a Baal Tshuva, right? Al Yom Eloi, you should not say to him, Zechor Masecha B'Shayim. That mirrors what the Mishnah just said. In other words, it's repeating that this is improper. The Mahoya ben Gerim, it's not a Chiddush here. If he was the son of Gerim, Al Yom Eloi Zechor Masecha Avichem. Then you should not say to him, remember your parents' deeds, how awful they were, etc., etc. And so making him feel bad. Now, if he was a ger, and so this is stam a ger. Now you have a ger who actually wants to come into the base medrash and study Torah. Al yom alone, you may not say to him, and this would be very egregious, but peh she'achal nevelos atreifus shkotzim v'ramashim bolul Torah shenemrim piagvura. In other words, it offends you because the person is now talking Torah, so to say, he's talking Torah, and that same mouth did all the worst Isurim in the world. So some people can't wrap their head around that. In other words, to some people, you're so far removed that they can't even conceive that a person can be Chazir B'Tshuva or be a ger, in this case a ger, and want to learn Torah. This is a special admonition to those do-gooders who defend the Rebbeinu Shalom. I'm defending the Rebbeinu Shalom. This is God's Torah. How could a person who ate nevelos study Torah? You think you're doing good, and so it's specifically important. And we have people like that. I'm sure there are people who are. We don't have to mention names. Who they're sometimes so anti something because this smacks of something so improper, and I'm defending God. Okay, don't defend God. You're not God's defender. So this is specifically what the Torah has to tell us: is that you mean good. You really mean well by saying, saying these things to him. So now we know, interestingly, by Gerim, that it's a very important in the process of Gerus is that you dissuade someone from becoming a ger. It's not just simple. Someone comes through your door, you're a rav, I want to be Megayer. Fine, let's sit down and talk tachlis. It doesn't work that way. The tzivui on Gerim is that you have to dissuade him multiple times. Again, I had this experience once where a woman said to me in genuine earnestness that she wanted to be Makabel, the Jewish faith. Again, she saw it in so many facets, and it was something that will fulfill her if she can become a Jew. And look, I took it face value. I don't know who she was or any background. So the first thing I did is I didn't say no. I said, I gave her a list of several books to read. I said, okay, start out by reading some of this material, and let's talk again. So I gave her the list and included sort of a variety of different books that talk about, Judaism and things like that. And I said, fine, let's meet in 2 weeks, whatever. She didn't come back. Now, what do I take from that? Either she went to somebody else, which I don't know, but that's exactly why Chazal tell us, start slowly and impress upon someone what it means to be a Jew. Oh, it's nice. They have morals. They have kibbud avein. They have all these things. But the intricacies of being a Jew are so important that for many people it becomes an achrayus, a burden they can't bear. There's the old story that I was born Jewish, but if I wasn't, and I looked into all the responsibilities, I never would be, because it's burdensome. It's not burdensome to us, but it's burdensome when you think of Taryag mitzvahs, you think of all the things a person has to do. There's more don'ts than do's, So look, do I need this? Is this something that I have to bear? So to many people, this is not an achrayus they want to bear, which is why you have to be very careful, especially with the ger. That's why the bunch says, well, hafta sager, because the Russian has a special place for him, kaviyachol, for gerim who truly are gerik tzedek, and they want to embrace Yiddishkeit without having the minimum requirements, i.e., a Jewish mother. Then, so these are things that sometimes, we've all come across people who are, quote, very Jewish, but aren't technically Jewish. So the question is, so what do? They had a Jewish father, they had a Jewish home, a Jewish grandmother. Turned out their mother wasn't Jewish, and that's an absolute requirement. You can't get around that. So you have to be Megayer. But these Gerim come into Judaism with as much knowledge or more than many other people, because in point of fact, they've been Jewish or practicing Judaism for a long time. So this is a very nuanced area. And again, this is why the Mishnah says that, the Gemara repeats it to tell us that you should not be the defender of the Bnei Shalom to say that he was you're not allowed to do that because of your past. Now, even further, and by the way, this is something that people have said, whether they mean it or don't mean it. Im hoy yisuin born alav, if yisurin, if suffering came upon a person, or he became very ill, or Islam, he had to bury his children, which is something that we can't even contemplate. Then don't say, in other words, this is a comparison. Don't say like they said to Eov when they say, "Hello, Yeroscha, kisloscha, tikvascha, v'som drochecha zochor nanu mi hoyanoki ava." Right. So by Eov we know that they castigated him, and he couldn't be makabel, that he should have embraced the Rebbeinu Shalom, and therefore all these bad things happened to him. So what we're seeing is that don't use that as a lever to say, you see, you weren't a good person, you weren't a proper yid, this is why you're suffering Yisurim. That's not for us to say. We boss of Adam, can't look at a person in his life and see what he's gone through and see, you see, Hashem is punishing you for deeds. That is completely out of line with what Jewish thinking is, because this is not something that is in our province. We can't make that determination. So, in other words, this is an admonition in our lives, is how to deal, especially when you're dealing with Balchuvas and other things. But bottom line, what you say has a tremendous impact, and in many ways, the Gemara will tell us that Einos Devarim is more severe than Einos Mammon, and we'll see why. It's maybe obvious to us, but Einos Devarim is a very, very terrible thing to be over, and we have to be especially careful. Now, let's go a step further. If a person had a donkey, and the donkey was driving down the road, and he needed food, the chamor needed food, and he asked the person who owned the field, they didn't just let his donkey graze, which would have been Geneva. So he didn't do that, but he asked for permission, and you own a piece of land where the donkey could graze. You may not say, and this is going to be an eye-opener, You can't say, well, just go down the street. There's someone who has a stand where he's selling teruah. Go ahead and go to him, and you can buy grain and feed your donkey. Now, why is that wrong? I mean, come on, a person needs parnasa. That's his business. He has teruah for sale, and people who come down that road should go to him to buy teruah. So that's, in other words, he's shucking him off because he doesn't want to give him gratis teruah, and he's saying go to so and so. But now listen to this. And he knows that that's false. So that's he's not selling grain. He just wants to get him off his back. So he says, you know what? There's someone who sells grain for your donkey. Just go half a mile down the road, and good riddance. That's Einos Devarim. Think about it. You have an opportunity to do a mitzvah and give him something to eat, okay? And even so, if you, let's say you're not the most prosperous person, someone is coming and needs a chesed, and you can do a chesed, right? Like we said in the beginning of our discussion, mitzvah habo biyadoi, he has an opportunity to do a mitzvah, and what he says is, no, go to someone else to do the mitzvah. I don't need the mitzvah. Go to someone else. And not only does he say that, but it's a false statement, because the guy will say, you know what, thank you very much. I didn't know there was a grain seller down the road. I'll be happy to go to him and buy the grain. And you know that that's not true. That fellow may tell him the same thing he is. Go somewhere else. I'm not going to give you. So in other words, it's Einos Devarim to do that. Now, you'll ask, is it Einos Devarim if it were true? The answer is no, because that person needs the parnasa. Yes, I can do a chesed, but now listen to this. If I do the chesed, then when he goes down the road to the seller of teruah, he's not going to buy for him. And therefore, I'm going to what? I'm going to take away parnasa from him because that's what he does for a living. Then that's a problem. It sounds like it shouldn't be, but that could be a problem. But if he's only doing it to get him off his back and say, oh, go to this other fellow, he'll definitely be able to sell you. And you know it's not true, that's Einos Devarim. There's a subtle difference here. One is a case where, yes, he could do the chesed, but someone else has a parnasa that he needs to support. That has legitimacy. That's not Einos Devarim. But if you tell him to go to someone who will sell him the teruah, and he says, thank you very much, and goes down the road and comes to the next guy, and the guy says, I'm not a seller of teruah. Who sent you to me? That's Einos Devarim. So there's a subtle difference, but it's very important to understand what it means to have Einos Devarim. That in some cases, Einos Devarim may not be Einos Devarim, as in the case where if the fellow was a legitimate seller of teruah.
That was a straight lie. That was not a recommendation. He knew that there was nobody down the road.
Correct.
So he lied.
So he lied. That's Einos Devarim.
Right.
That's exactly Einos Devarim.
Right.
Because he did something that was so improper when, the other guy, now, did he know the other guy would give him or not? No idea. But basically, you're saying something improper that you can't do. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda goes off to an far. Aflo Yisla Einav Al Hameka Bishor She'ein Lo Dami. So this is a problem. This is a problem. There are people who, they like nice things. And again, we said before, the whole idea of window shopping, which is a generic term. I'm not talking about that. I mean, if you're window shopping from the outside, no problem. But if you don't have the ability because you don't have the money, not that you don't want to buy. It's one thing to say, I come into a store to get pricing. I could be a millionaire. I don't want to buy anything. I just want to go in there and browse around, ask them some questions and leave. That's a no. Rabbi Yehuda is machadish that a person who can't even afford what is being sold, but he likes the idea of seeing nice things, says Rabbi Yehuda, lo yisla enav al hameka, he should not set his eyes on a mekach b'shor she'ein lo damim when he doesn't have money. Now, that really is a very strong statement because, some people's enjoyment is just seeing nice things and sort of getting into it and then knowing they can't buy and that's it. Yehuda says that's an issur. Yehuda says that's a nos devarim if you're going in to engage the storekeeper in an item that, not that you don't want to buy. I can't buy it. I don't have the money. So again, it's a little bit more of a point than what we've been saying is that that sort of wishful thinking, it doesn't take the place of the issur of Ainah, and a person should not do that. So again, the nos devarim is a pretty serious matter, and okay.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda, is it?
So again,
The halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda.
it is like Rabbi Yehuda.
So if I go in and I see something nice and I say to myself, if I save for 6 months, I'll be able to afford that because I want to look at something and I want to try to target what I need to do to get there. I'm not able to buy it at that moment, but that's something that I aspire to do. Is that Ona?
Well, so let me say two things. Layaway, if that's where we're going, is not Ainah.
No, not layaway.
Not
I don't
layaway.
have it now because layaway. I mean, in the era of layaway, when it was a lot of people walked away from stuff because they couldn't end up affording it, so people made tons of money. But I want to know. I want to see something that I aspire to save toward. Give me something I love it, and I want to do this in 6 months. If I save carefully, I'll be able to afford it, but I can't afford it now.
Okay, so
it's not definite that I'm going to be able to afford it in the future, but I'm going to aspire to do that.
Okay, so Michael, you have now been mechaven to the next piece of Gemara, exactly what the Gemara is about to say. What you asked is exactly what the Gemara is about to say. Take a look.
I looked ahead.
Okay. So the Gemara now goes one step further in Ainah and says, Shari Hadavar Mosul Alev. You know what? Ainah depends on your heart. Here we went ahead and said, if a person goes in and walks out, or if a person can't afford and he goes in and bothers the storekeeper, that's Ainah. Legitimately, it's Ainah. Says the Gemara, Shahar Davar Masal Lev. You know what? This whole discussion of Ainah depends on your heart. What does that mean? The Chol Davar HaMasal Lev. Any question that depends on a person's heart. Remember at the outset when I quoted the pasuk Lus'aneh, that a person, what do they say? The pasuk says, and you should fear God. What does one have to do with the other? What does Losona have to do with Reis Melokecha? Now the Gemara tells us, you know what? This all depends on your heart. So Michael, if a person goes in and says, this is $1,000 and I only have 500 and I aspire to do it, I really want to buy this. What does his heart say? That he's not just leading on the seller. He has a legitimate reason and basis to say, I want to buy this item. That's not Ainah. Because why? Right? We say in the Animamin, Yodea Machshavos. So Rabbi Shalom knows Machshavos. What does that mean? He knows Machshavos. He knows your heart. And if your heart is pure, and your heart says, I really want to buy this item for my wife or for a present. I can't afford it. So, but I'm going to aspire to get it. And he means it. That's when the Torah says, that's what has to happen, that you have to realize the Rabbanu Shalom knows your intent. And if your intent is proper, it's not Ainah. It's not Ainah. So, Michael, isn't that what you're asking? You're saying, I really want to buy this. I can't afford it today, but I know I want to buy it. I'm not misleading the seller. I'm doing this legitimately. Teretz is that's not I know. That absolutely is not I know because your heart, your intent is not to just mislead him, but to actually say, I want to buy this item. Can't do it today, but I want to buy the item. So in that case, especially if you express that to the seller may say, okay, we'll find a way, I'll put it aside, come back in a few weeks, let's talk. But that's not my norm. That's not, it's just like the example you gave before, where you engage the seller in Mekach and Memka because you have something to sell to him. So that's not enough. You're not misleading him. You're coming and say, oh, this is a nice item, but let me tell you something. I have an item that you can benefit from, and you will, if you buy it for me. All right, that's a little bit of a strain, but that's not enough because you're coming in with the idea that you want to engage him. So you have to ask him, you have to know how much the item is and everything, so you can engage him in that conversation. So it's a very subtle thing again. But we're saying that Oino is something that you really have to internalize because if you don't, then you could be over the line. Okay, so this is a very interesting point, and we're injecting to say intent is extremely important. Okay, so now we're going to get into a little bit of an agadita, where we're going to see from different Amoraim with examples of Arnos Devarim. All right, so
Rabbi,
let's
excuse me. Rabbi?
Yeah, you have a question?
Yeah. Why isn't there a requirement that a person has to represent him when he represents a broker, a middleman? Why isn't there a regular halacha that you have to tell the truth about who you are when you go into any conversation about purchasing something? Like whenever I used to go around as a broker looking for cars for people, I always had told the salesman, look, this is not for me, it's for a client of mine.
Yeah.
And so you have to be very up forward to make sure that the salesman doesn't think that this is a live customer. This is a middleman who has customers. I mean, that should almost be a requirement that every Jew has to present himself properly the minute you go into any kind of conversation, whatever. But I never heard that there's such a halacha that you're required.
No, you're right. Absolutely. That a person shouldn't mislead. And part of misleading is what you just said is saying exactly who you are. But now think about that for a minute. In the eyes of the seller, although you're a broker, you're still a buyer. In other words, you have the obligation to be forthright and to say, I'm not coming from me, I'm coming from someone else, but I'm looking at what you have to buy.
But there's
The
no
eyes of the seller.
That's not mandatory in our halachas. I never heard of something.
Yeah, no, it's an Eitz Tova, correct. But in the eyes of the seller, it's not an Os Devarim because you're still, in the larger sense, a buyer. If you find the right car for your client, he will buy it.
Yeah.
So although you're a middleman, and you have to say you're a middleman, I'm going to tell you something very interesting in a moment. Although you're a middleman, you're still a buyer. So that wouldn't be a Os Devarim. Interestingly enough, in common law, when a person, and again, this is true in real estate or other transactions, it's required on a broker to announce himself as a broker and not a buyer. That is a law. That's a requirement in the common law. So what we've established as our law, right, Beino Amim, is that you can't mislead and say to the seller, I'm interested in your property, or I'm interested in your car, or whatever it happens to be. You have to say, I'm a broker on behalf of a buyer. Now, strictly speaking, is an oinos devarim. And I would say that the net that I've cast suggests that it's not appropriate, it's not the way to be, but if you're not saying it and but the Havamina, remember, what's in the left, what's in the heart. Okay, you're not buying it for yourself, but you're buying it for someone. So you're really an extension of that person. Eitz Tova, you should absolutely be upfront with what you are, but it can't be considered I know, because at the end of the day, if you negotiate something fairly, you will buy it, i.e., your client will buy it, but you will be the person to buy it. So that's a tricky one, but I don't believe it's I know, but it's an Eitz Tova because the halacha doesn't say you have to announce, because you're really still working on behalf of the buyer.
Rabbi, as it relates to halacha, to amplify Jay's question, agency was very common in, businesses were agents for others. I mean, that was very common. So does that have any play into the fact that you don't have to declare under halachic rules that you are an agent versus that you're buying directly? Because many times you would sell to an agent rather than a direct sale to a person. So does that have an impact as to why, as Jay says, it's not required that you state it overtly, but you don't have to say it under halachic rules?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, you're right, because the halacha here talks about deception, right? Deception is einos devarim. Are you deceiving when you don't represent that you're a broker, but again, believe in your heart, you know that you are legitimate because you have a buyer, and if the price is right, your buyer will buy. So from the ono standpoint, it can't be ono. Maybe it's not derech eretz, maybe, like you say, agency. And we have those laws today on the books with regard to people representing other people, that they have to be open. It's a violation of the code of ethics for a person not to say, I represent somebody else. Mind you, it's an ethical consideration. Halachically, you can say it's not oinos devarim. It's not the nice thing to do. You should say it, but that's derech eretz. That's not the halacha of oino, because you are representing someone who will buy. The fact that you haven't disclosed it, okay, not the nice thing to do, but it's not a noise devarim. So you're right, Michael, that agency has arisen for other reasons as to why in our society we have to be open about who we're dealing with and what we're dealing with. Otherwise, things get a little muddy. But the Torah, from the Torah standpoint, if you, again, you're if you're an Orthodox Jew, a Frum Yid, and you say, I'm in this business, I have a reason not to disclose who I am, maybe I'll get a better price, because if I'm a broker, he may say, well, I'll charge the broker more. So in other words, he's engaged in sort of a little subtle mekach memker, and that's not an issue. It's not derech eretz, but it's not an isur oino. So in that particular case, a person does not violate the principles oino. But again, we see that the ethical code that we deal with today, which again, it certainly comes from the Jewish ethos of halacha, it refines to the point where everything you have to say has to be truthful. And if you walk into a store and said, I want to buy, then the seller is going to say, you want to buy. Okay, but the I want to buy doesn't mean I want to buy. My client wants to buy, but I want to buy for him. So how do we look at this? We can say you're a shaliach. Shaliach shel adam kamosa. You are the shaliach of the buyer. Technically, aren't you really, as a broker? You're a shaliach. He may pay you or he may not pay you, but you're shaliach shel adam. And you have the obligation of bringing him. Now, where do you make your money when you're a broker? So, you tell me, Jay, but I don't know in the car business whether you're paid like in real estate where you're paid to be the broker, but what you get is that you buy it at a price that you can sell it to the person and make your money by selling it. In other words,
No.
I'm going to buy it for $5,000 and
car
I'll sell
stuff.
it for $6,000, right? Isn't that
The
the way
car
brokers
stuff.
works?
In the car stuff, I did it differently. I was paid a fee if the buyer buys it from the dealer.
Uh-huh.
I will go and negotiate with the
Who
dealer,
paid you the fee? Who pays the fee?
the buyer.
Oh, okay. So the
Buyer
buyer
comes
buys
to
a
me
fee.
and they
You're the
say,
shaliach of the.
I know that you're going to find a good car for me because I don't have time or I don't know what to
And
look
he's going to pay you a fee. Same
But
thing.
I had another question on that.
But Jay, you understand that the Indian of Shlichus is, I'll pay you to help me. There's nothing wrong with that.
No, I never took money if the person didn't buy it.
No, but you're shaliach. You're only going to the broker to buy a car because you have a client who says, "I need a car and I'll pay you." So
Right.
you're not misleading the seller, and you're the shaliach of the buyer. That's okay.
Right. So how about today? One last question. Today in real estate, they have an open house. So hundreds of people can come through an open house. They
Right.
don't really generally declare, I'm coming for, I just want to look around. I just want to see what kind of furniture you had in this house. I mean, there's all kinds of motives of
Yeah.
people who walk into open houses.
Right.
So it's not necessarily,
Yeah.
it doesn't sound like you have to declare who you are and why you're there.
True. And I believe that is not a no. Why? Because the open house, the broker or the owner, whoever is doing the open house, has an expectation that people will come and look around, even if they're not going to buy. The whole principle of Einos Devarim, is that you're misleading a seller into believing you are a legitimate customer.
Okay.
If you have an open house, that's different because technically you're saying to the world, come in and look. You don't have to buy, come in and look. In other words, they want the exposure. They want people. You know why? You're going to come in and you're going to not buy and you're going to tell your friend, I saw this stunning house with furniture. You must go look at it. So
Yeah.
he's benefit. The more people come, the more he benefits, not loses, he benefits. So therefore, there can't be Einos Devarim when the expectation was never there. There has to be an expectation in order to be Einos Devarim. Here, there's no expectation.
Yeah.
So that's a good question, but you see, again, the dividing line between what is and what is
So it's
not.
not only your intention, whether you want to buy or not, you have to understand the intention of the seller,
Correct.
which is
Correct.
different between an open house or a retail store down the block.
On the box, absolutely different. Absolutely agree. That's exactly the
Yeah,
point.
I didn't
Is
think
that there are times when a seller doesn't really have an expectation he's going to sell, but he has an expectation that people will look.
Right.
And I think in real estate, that's a good example because I don't know the statistics of a person who has an open house and someone comes and buys. I'm sure there have been cases, but I would bet that there are many more cases where a person that has an open house, he has 100 people coming in, nobody buys, and he says, this was a successful open house. I didn't sell it, but I had a successful open house. Because that's the mindset of what you're doing, is you're doing it with the intention of having exposure. So if you say, I don't have a Havamina buy, but I'm going in there, like you say, to look, to see. And he invited me in. He invited me in. He didn't say come in and buy. He said come in and look.
Yeah.
Right? That's what the expectation of an open
Well,
house is. Come in and look.
So the intention of the seller is really part of this equation between the intention of the buyer, to be honest, and prevent onaah, as well as knowing what the seller's
In this
intentions
particular case, no one is misleading anybody because the seller is telling the broker, have an open house and let's get a lot of people in. Maybe we'll have an offer, maybe we'll have someone think about it. But having people come in, as I say, is in and of itself the end result, a positive end result to having the open house. So therefore, there can't be onaah in a situation where truly there was no expectation. He didn't have an expectation that someone would come in and buy. Okay, if there was a sign that said browsers not welcome, okay.
Okay, but also
Maybe
the
have I
same
know, but if browsers are
when
welcome,
when you go into an open house and the house is for sale, right, per se, not just the contents, the ones standing there, they're trying to size you up. And the minute you have some interest, they will spend time with you and ignore the other people walking through the house. So it becomes very touchy in
yeah,
terms of
I think,
their
yeah,
behavior can almost say that there's the seller, the one standing in the doorway welcoming you, could actually cause you to have a problem because you didn't automatically represent yourself. I mean, it's just very complicated.
yeah. So I'll say this to your question because it's a good question. If you come into an open house and let's say you engage the broker, like you say, to the exclusion of everybody else, and you have no hava minute to buy, but you're engaging him, taking him away from talking to other people, and you know that this isn't going anywhere.
Right.
That could be a nos devarim.
Okay.
That situation could be a nos devarim because then you're focusing in and saying, I'm going to take this guy, I'm going to ask him questions and everything else. Why am I doing it? Now, if you yourself were a broker for somebody else, that's the situation that you mentioned before.
Something else.
But if you're not representing somebody else and you're coming in and you're bothering this guy and asking questions to no end, then that could be a nos devarim. That's a different situation. But in the normal case of an open house, where people come in, they ask a question, they move on, they drink a l'chaim if it's available, whatever it happens to be, that's not a nos devarim. But your particular point of someone who drills down on it and talks and focuses and spend time, there a nos devarim may in fact come up. So let's just go a little bit further. Omer Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Yochai. Rabbi Yochanan says in the Shimon Rabbi Yochai, Gadol oinos devarim me'anos mammon. There's a greater sin in oinos devarim than in oinos mammon. Why? We just said it before. Shezeh nema bo v'yoresim alakecha. Because by oinos devarim, which we said that lo shayna is oinos devarim. There is the words v'yoresim alakecha. By the pasuk of Mammon, it doesn't say v'yireisim alakeh, right? It doesn't say you should fear your God. What's the point? The point is that in Oinos Devarim, their intent is what's critical. Intent is what's critical. You know what? Let me give you an example. In an Oinos Mammon, you sell something for $500 that's worth only $250. Okay, you're going to talk about intent. You wanted to make a windfall profit. Says the Torah, you're over or not. There isn't a question of intent here. It's black and white. You're selling it for 500. It's really worth 250. Or in the other case, with the other way around. But there's no intent involved. In words, we say oftentimes that words are more harmful than deeds, because with words you really impact someone in a way that doing something may have a limited effect, but words can do so much more. And certainly, if the Torah says v'yireisim alakecha, that means that the Torah is emphasizing that by oinos devarim, words matter. And if you're going to say something that you have no intent or is totally improper, you will be punished for it. And that's what Rabbi Yochanan was saying. He's saying because of the words of V'yireisim alakecha, it's proof positive that a oinos devarim is much more serious than a oinos mammon. Rabbi Eliezer oimer, and Rabbi Eliezer says another reason why it's more serious is very important that begufo means in and of itself in his being. When you say something that a person has expectations, the emotions run high, and then you let him down by just walking away, showing that you had no intention. That's pshat begufo. The zeba mamono, says Rabbi Eliezer, that begufo is much worse than bemono. And the last mandomer, which I think will help us understand, Rabbi Shmuel ben Achmeni, remember Rabbi Shmuel ben Achmeni says, "Zen litten lihi shavoin, v'zen lo nitten lihi shavoin," and I think that wraps it up. One of them you can do restitution, repay for something that you do with mammon, because again, you sold it for an improper price, you have to pay for it. But words, what tshuva can you do here, right? It isn't, you're not paying a fine. The Torah isn't saying, oh, we're going to charge you a fifth because you said something improper. That's not what's happening here.
And Rabbi, isn't that endemic of the fact that mammonos is enforceable by the courts, but in terms of devarim, it is a matter of between you and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and so it's far more serious. So it's not enforceable by the courts, but it's between you and God knows what's in your heart, as you said before, as the Gemara says, and so therefore it's far more serious for that crime against God, and as opposed to the fact that there can be restoration in the other case.
Exactly. That's exactly what we're saying, is that the difference between the two is the Yoresa Melakecha. One is not it's ethereal. It's not something you can grab on and say, this is it. Mammon, this is it. But words are not. And let me just give as a postscript, because this is going to be an interesting point. There are states, Florida, I think, being one of them, where an oral contract is enforceable. Because we know with the various laws against statutory fraud, that you have to have it in writing. That's the lion's share of agreement. Florida, and maybe one or two other states, say that certainly if there's witnesses to an oral agreement, it's enforceable. Why is it enforceable? Because the expectation is that when you said it with intent. Just to your point, Michael, is that, well, we're going to hold you to your intent. You're not going to be able to just slide of words. Oh, I'm going to say words that don't mean anything. If I say I'm going to buy this property for you and I'm willing to pay $500,000, and you say done, and then you say no, I don't really mean it, that is a problem, because that could be enforceable. That's where Onos Devarim has its effect, is because from a Jewish standpoint, we're talking about V'yirei Malakecha. We don't know your mind. The Rebbeinu Shalom knows your mind. Okay, fine. But in real life, there's opportunities where what you say matters. It's not just it's not just something to say. But it's interesting that all these three views, whether V'yirei Malakecha, they all sort of have something in common in that. Whether it's begufo, b'mamono, or he can do tshuva in one and not tshuva in the other. The point is that with mammon, we can't grab onto it. It's not physical. And because something is not physical, the Torah is saying that oino is worse, where something is not physical, not something that you can actually sort of say, this is it, than by mammon, which is physical. And that's, I think, the difference that all of these mandorim are saying, is that mammon, has consequences. You can deal with it. Words have no ability to rehabilitate. Therefore, the consequences are much greater. So we'll stop here, and the Gemara keeps going on. But I think again we're getting a flavor here of what it means in Onos Devarim, and how we all of us collectively have to be careful, because words matter. When we say something, and you're going to see in the further Gemara that there's even a much deeper concern about Onos Devarim than what we're talking about. So we're talking about violating V'yirei Malakecha, and that there's no tshuva, and how do you rehabilitate, etc. There's something even a step beyond that, which we'll talk about Mitzvah next week. So one thing I just want to say, and Menashe, I'll be in touch with you, is I hope to have the shiur next week, but there's an outside possibility, since I'll be going away for Shabbos Sheva brachos, that I may be compromised Sunday morning. I don't know. Right. So I'll have a better idea before Shabbos, and I'll let you know, so you can